Hi class, this is a video answer key for this homework. Since we're kind of reviewing the process of doing chord scales, I'll just say a few things about that. This is relating to this piece of music which we've already analyzed. Obviously, chord scales are a way to organize our melodic and harmonic information all in one sort of interface that allows us to see the melody-harmony relationships and figure out what sounds are going to work well with the chord derived from that scale, and so on. So the first thing I would recommend is that you have a procedure for writing chord scales. The procedure should be that you write chord tones first, then you add the in-between notes, and you label everything carefully. Let's divide them into categories. First, there are chord scales that are relative, that is, they are derived from a major scale. Those are the modes: Ionian, Dorian, Phrygian, Lydian, etc. So let's look at those in this document, and I would circle those first and work on them first. So we have Locrian, that's the seventh mode. That's the seventh. A Locrian is the seventh mode of B flat major. Aeolian is the sixth mode of B flat major. That means that these chord scales are going to have exactly the same notes as B flat major, just starting on the root of this scale. Here it will start on A, it will start on G. So in the first stage of this video, why don't you make sure you check your modal chord scales and then check the answer key, which will come next. So that make sure you've identified all of those. These two, that's a different scale. Let's see, anything that is relative to B flat major, it looks like those might be the only two. Okay, and check them. Here's the answer to those two chord scales. You notice that I like to connect the chord tones with stems. I think that makes it visually stand out. I'm putting my labeling for my chord tones down below, and I'm putting my labeling for my other notes up above. This is colored in because it's a harmonica void note, S flat 2. This is hollow because it's an available tension T11, and this is T flat 13 available T9, available T11, not available S flat 6. So these are the conventions for writing chord scales that I recommend. Next, I'd like to talk about Lydian chord scales. Lydian chord scales are very easy to write if you know something about their structure. Lydian major scale or Lydian flat 7 both have the same interior notes, that is, notes that are the non-chord tones, the potential 9, the potential 11, and potential 13. These are the non-chord tones. They both have the same ones, which is a 2 major chord. In other words, a major chord that's up a whole step from the root of the key of the scale. So up a whole step from C flat will be D flat. Up a whole step from C will be D. Well, that is the triad that will go in between the chord tones. So pause the video and see if you can write the chord scale then. In other words, put in the chord tones, and then in between the chord tones, write the notes of a major triad that is up a whole step from the root of the scale. Here's my C flat Lydian chord scale. You can see those are my chord tones, 1, 3, 5. Actually, it shouldn't be a flat 7. I'm sorry, that's mislabeled. That should be 7, just major 7. And in between, we have a major triad that is up a whole step from C flat, which is D flat major. You can see D flat, F, and A flat. That will automatically give you a correct Lydian chord scale, and you will always have T9, T sharp 11, and T13. So a major triad up a whole step from the root of the scale will give you the correct Lydian notes. So let's try it with this scale. This is C Lydian flat 7. So we've started by putting in our chord tones. I purposely made a mistake here to see if you could spot it. What is missing from this currently? And hopefully you spotted that this key signature says E flat, and we need an E natural for this chord scale. So you would put that in. Once that's put in, then you fill in the in-between notes with a major triad up a whole step from C, which is, that's right, a D major triad. Label it T9, T sharp 11, T13, and it will be correct. And here's the correct answer. There's your chord tones, and there's the D triad, and that makes a T9, a T sharp 11, and a T13. There are a few other Lydian chord scales down the page, so make sure that you've written those correctly. Get your chord tones right first, and then put that major triad a whole step apart, a whole step above the root of the scale for your in-between notes. Okay, next let's move to all the other modal scales that are not diatonic to B flat. Well, one approach to getting these correct, and there are many of these, by the way. There's a B Dorian, there's an A Ionian, etc. One approach to getting these right is to make sure that you're spelling the chord correctly first, and then think in the other key signature temporarily. So A Ionian key signature 3 sharps, B Dorian key signature related to A major 3 sharps. And so you can just temporarily write in the sharps, get all your notes correct, transfer over the sharps to the individual notes, and then see how it relates to the flats in this key signature, for example. So let's start with the A Ionian. I would write in my 3 sharps, F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. I would write in all my chord tones and notes. I would transfer over the sharps, and then I would realize that I have to have an E natural because there's an E flat there, and I have to have a B natural because there's a B flat there. That would be the approach there. So take a look at all your related scales. These would relate to A major. Let's see, C Locrian would relate to D flat major, right? It's the 7th mode of D flat. B flat Ionian, oh, that's totally diatonic. E Mixolydian is going to relate to A major again, and so on, and go through all your modal chord scales. That will be the same notes as D flat major. And once you've done those, all we're left with are the mixo altered scales and the altered scale itself, and the mixo scales. So let's talk about them. The altered scale is kind of something that a lot of people have trouble with, but it's actually a fairly simple concept if you just remember one thing. In the altered scale, we do not have a perfect 5th chord tone. We have a flat 5th chord tone. So you write, it's always a dominant scale, so you would write the chord tones of D7, but you would have a flat 5 instead of a perfect 5th. Those will be your chord tones. Then all the in-between notes will be everything that can be altered. So a flat 9, a sharp 9. There is no 11 because the flat 5 is sort of taking over from that. And then a flat 13. So it's a dominant arpeggio with a flat 5 plus flat 9, sharp 9, and flat 13. So if you know this scale very well, if you're confident with that scale, you could say that an altered scale is really like a mixo flat 9, sharp 9, flat 13 scale, but with a flat 5 as well. That's what an altered scale is. So now check that. Our A Ionian scale, remember what I said, I came up with 3 sharps for the key signature. I put those in, F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. Then I noticed that the rest of the notes would be naturals, so I had to check the key signature and see, okay, I got to make that B flat a B natural, and I got to make this E an E natural. And that's how I got the scale, using my knowledge of major scales. Moving on to the altered scale, here we have that picture, and here it is clearly written as a D major, a D dominant 7th arpeggio, but with a flat 5. Then altered flat 9, altered sharp 9, and notice that it's spelled enharmonically as F natural. That's very common. You could also write it as E sharp, but this is more common. Then there's no 11. I went out of my way to draw your attention to that. And then there's T flat 13. So it's like a mixo flat 9, sharp 9, flat 13 scale with a flat 5. That's what an altered scale is. Okay, next let's move on to, all we've got left actually are the mixo scales. Okay, and they are very easy to understand if you know the fact that a mixo scale has all mixo scales have one particular thing in common, which is that they all have S4, which means they have scale degree 4 as a harmonica void note. They do not have any sharp 4, diminished fourths. It's always a perfect 4th, and it's always S4, a harmonica void note. And then you just do chord tones around that, and then whatever tensions are described in the scale. So the chord tones of F7, S4, which would be a perfect 4th above the root of the chord, which would be B flat. and then a flatted ninth, a sharp ninth, and a flat 13. Okay, here's our F mixo flat 9, sharp 9, flat 13 scale. You can see there's our chord tones 1, 3, 5, flat 7. Forgot to write in the flat 7, but it would go right there. And notice that those happen to be all diatonic to this key, F7 being the 5 chord of B flat. But then we have our S4, which is always present in a mixo scale, and that's also going to be diatonic to this key. And then we have our altered tensions, T flat 9, G flat in this case, and T flat 13, D flat in this case. That's the way you write a mixo flat 9, sharp 9, flat 13 scale. The complete answer key, you can, I will also upload it as a PDF, but you can look at it closely by zooming in on the video and double check everything, but you'll see that everything's there. I see I can tell there I left out one label there, that's S flat 2. So I'll fix that before I upload it. But there's the whole thing.